I can't believe my eyes. One moment I'm standing in the quiet morning light checking on my family's farmland just like I do every day. The next, I'm choking on clouds of dust as a convoy of roaring bulldozers rips through the soil my grandfather spent his life cultivating. Shocked yet? I sure was. And here's the real kicker. An HOA is behind it, claiming they've got every right to carve up the land that's legally mine. Did they honestly think I'd just watch and do nothing? Let me tell you, the look on their president's face, this smug, self-assured grin, tells me she's certain they've pulled a fast one. But you know what she doesn't realize? I've stumbled onto something that could blow their scheme wide open. It's a trump card so powerful it might shut down their entire construction project before they even lay the first foundation. Think I'm bluffing? What would you do if your family's heritage was bulldozed overnight by people with deep pockets and questionable morals? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you fight tooth and nail to protect what's rightfully yours? Here's a heads up. If you've ever been pushed around by someone who thinks they hold all the cards, this story might give you a glimmer of hope and a plan of attack. Stick around, because what happens next could change everything. And trust me, you won't want to miss how I turn the tables on them. How in the world did it come to this? How did I go from living a peaceful life among the rows of wheat and corn to standing on the brink of losing everything my family had built for generations? But you know what jolted me into full, white-hot anger? That self-satisfied grin from the HOA representative, Ms. Lawrence. She wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the association's emblem, looking more like a corporate overlord than someone who cared about neighbors or community. She waved a piece of paper in front of me, some official deed with the county's seal, claiming my farmland was now rezoned for residential development. My signature apparently was on that paper, but I swear on my ancestors' graves I never signed any such thing. Something was off, something reeked of corruption, and worst of all, they'd wasted no time starting construction. As if my voice, my rights, and my life's work didn't matter at all. I stumbled forward, my boots kicking up rocks. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. One of the machine operators paused momentarily, glancing at me with an almost apologetic expression, then resumed digging. The world tilted around me. This had to be some nightmare. My farmland had always been my refuge, my sanctuary. Now it felt like a battlefield. The worst part? I could see the foundation for row after row of townhomes, each presumably to be sold at exorbitant prices in some fancy real estate scheme. Residents would be told they were part of an exclusive community, complete with manicured lawns and tidy sidewalks, but they'd never know the heartbreak, the betrayal, the dirty legal wrangling that allowed those homes to exist. I felt a hand on my shoulder, my lifelong friend Lisa, who lived a few miles down the road. She looked at me, eyes brimming with concern. "We're not letting this happen," she whispered. "We'll fight it." But I sensed the mountain we'd have to climb was unlike anything we'd ever faced. My farmland was my heritage and my identity. Now a wealthy HOA believed it belonged to them. I couldn't see a clear path forward, but I knew I had to push back. If I didn't, this place, my father's greenhouse, my grandfather's handmade barn, even my grandmother's beloved orchard, would vanish under layers of concrete and asphalt. As I stared at the bulldozer's wide steel blade hitting the earth, I wondered if there was any chance to save it all before it was too late. Would I have the power to stand up to the HOA? That question haunted me, and it was only the beginning of a larger battle I never saw coming. The next morning I jolted awake, the pit in my stomach reminding me that the bulldozers were not just a nightmare. My phone buzzed incessantly on the bedside table. Text after text from neighbors and distant relatives, all stunned by the sudden change in the landscape. Some offered support, others demanded an explanation. None of them had any real answers, though. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on a flannel shirt, and headed straight to the kitchen. My mother, who still lived with me on the farm, was pacing by the window, peering out at the horizon where the construction was already visible. Her hair had turned silver over the years, but her eyes still sparkled with determination. She caught my gaze and said, "I knew something was wrong when I saw those fancy cars driving through town last month. They were scoping out the land. You need to find out how this rezoning got approved. She handed me a mug of coffee and I took a deep sip, trying to steady my nerves. She was right, of course. The question was, where to begin? Who had the authority to rezone farmland without my explicit consent? I was about to sit down and rifle through my filing cabinet for every deed and legal document when a loud knock rattled the screen door. Lisa stood there, holding a manila folder under one arm, her face flushed. "I got something," she announced as she stepped in. "My cousin works at the county clerk's office. He found the rezoning application. Your signature is definitely there, but guess what? It's dated on a day I happen to know you were at a hospital with your mother." I sucked in a sharp breath. Forgery. The HOA had to have forged my signature or hired someone to do it. My blood boiled. "We need a lawyer," I muttered, half to myself. "Somebody who can challenge the validity of this rezoning." Lisa nodded. "I got a name from my cousin, a friend of a friend who specializes in property disputes. She's agreed to meet us today." We wasted no time. Within the hour, we were sitting in the cramped office of an attorney named Michelle Carter. She was in her early 40s with a serious expression and a relentless aura. Her desk was stacked with papers and sticky notes. As soon as we explained the situation, she started jotting down notes, her brow furrowing. Forged signatures, possible corruption in the county clerk's office, construction already underway. "This is serious," Michelle said, leaning back in her chair. "The first step is to file an injunction to halt construction while we investigate, but you need to be prepared for a fight. HOAs have deep pockets, and if they've got county officials in their pocket, it's going to be tough." Despite the weight of her words, I felt a glimmer of hope. At least we had a starting point. I set my jaw and thought of my ancestors. They'd endured droughts, floods, and market crashes. They'd never given up. Neither would I. Little did I know the fight ahead would be more complicated than anything I could have imagined. A week later, the construction raged on as if nothing had happened. The paperwork for our injunction was still crawling through the system, tangled in bureaucracy. Meanwhile, trucks thundered down the dusty path leading to the heart of my farmland, carrying cement, lumber, and an ever-growing cadre of workers. Ms. Lawrence, the HOA president, appeared to be overseeing everything from her sleek SUV parked near the construction site. Every now and then I'd catch her in a heated conversation on her cell phone. She didn't bother hiding her annoyance when she saw me approach. "Still fighting this, are we?" she said, tapping her manicured nails on the SUV's window frame. "You should know when to quit, Mr. Peterson. Change is inevitable, and these homes are nearly sold out already." My hands clenched into fists. "You built all of this on forged paperwork," I growled. "You think you can just steamroll over a century of my family's heritage?" A smirk appeared on her face, followed by a condescending shrug. "My dear, you just don't have the resources to stop us. And soon enough, the county's going to see all the new tax revenue these townhomes bring in. They'll side with progress, not an outdated farm." Before I could retort, she slammed the car door and drove off, leaving me in a swirl of dust and frustration. That night, exhausted and overwhelmed, I slumped on the front porch with Lisa, sipping iced tea under the flickering porch light. The sky was clear, the stars like scattered diamonds. Normally, I'd find peace in that view, but not tonight. The constant hum of machinery in the distance was a jarring reminder of the war zone my land had become. "You're holding up?" Lisa asked softly. I exhaled a shaky breath. "Trying. I feel powerless watching them build. This farm isn't just real estate, it's my legacy. My grandparents' memories are in that barn. My father taught me how to plant corn in the same fields where they're pouring concrete." Lisa placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone. Michelle's working on the legal angle. Meanwhile, we should see if there's any local support. Town halls, petitions, something." She was right. Our small town might have been overshadowed by the county's bigger developments, but many people still valued farmland and local heritage. If we could drum up enough public outrage, maybe the county would be forced to pay attention. So we hatched a plan. Organize a community meeting at the local church hall. invite everyone we could think of. Neighbors, friends, local business owners, even the press. We wanted the story out there, that an HOA had brazenly taken over farmland through dubious means. We needed to show that the fight wasn't just about me. It was about protecting our community from underhanded development deals that threatened our way of life. I felt a spark in my chest, a mix of anger and determination. If they wanted a battle, they'd get one, and I wasn't going down quietly. The day of the community meeting arrived and the church hall buzzed with chatter and restless energy. Lisa and I had put out flyers at grocery stores, post offices, and social media groups dedicated to preserving local farmland. A few reporters from the local TV station showed up, camera crews in tow, eager for a story that hinted at corruption and drama. I scanned the crowd. Farmers with sun-weathered faces stood shoulder to shoulder with concerned parents, small business owners, and retirees who'd lived in the area for decades. The hum of voices died down when I stepped up to the front of the room, microphone in hand. My palms were sweaty, but I swallowed my nerves. I had to speak up for my family and for everyone who cared about preserving our heritage. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm Jim Peterson, and my family's farm is under threat by an HOA that claims they've rezoned our land. I never signed off on this, and we have reason to believe there was a forgery involved." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in on my face. I felt my mother's eyes on me from the front row, giving me silent encouragement. I took a breath, pressing on. This isn't just about my farm. It's about every farmer, every homeowner, and every family who might find themselves blindsided by powerful organizations with enough money and influence to sway decisions at the county level. We need your help. Next to me, Lisa displayed copies of the suspicious rezoning documents on an overhead screen. The highlight of my forged signature elicited gasps. One local official, sitting in the audience, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I recognized him as Carl Hoffman, an assistant in the county planning department. I'd invited him, hoping for transparency, but by the way he was avoiding eye contact, I suspected he might know more than he let on. Michelle Carter, our attorney, stepped forward to outline our legal strategy. "We're seeking an injunction to halt construction, but that's only the first step. If we're going to expose wrongdoing, we need witnesses, documents, anything that can prove the rezoning was pushed through illegally. If you know anything, speak up. Now's the time." After the presentation, people lined up to voice support and share rumors they'd heard. One elderly farmer said he'd been approached by a development scout who claimed to represent a mysterious group offering top dollar for farmland. Another neighbor admitted he saw Ms. Lawrence having lunch with county officials multiple times over the past few months. We collected stories, phone numbers, and email addresses, promising to follow up. The sense of solidarity was palpable, yet overshadowed by a collective unease that corruption ran deeper than we realized. As the meeting ended and folks filed out, I felt a renewed surge of determination. The community was on my side, and with their backing, I might stand a chance. Little did I know that behind the scenes, forces were already moving to silence our efforts and make sure the truth stayed buried. A few days later, I found myself pacing in Michelle Carter's office again. She skimmed through the statements we'd gathered, occasionally pausing to jot down notes. Her expression was intense, but there was a flicker of excitement, too, like a detective closing in on a suspect. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a tall, lean man with thinning hair stepped in. Michelle stood up, smiling. "Jim, this is Hank Rollins, a private investigator I sometimes work with. He's been checking into Ms. Lawrence's background and the financials behind the HOA's development." Hank nodded politely and slid a folder across Michelle's desk. "I've got bank records, wire transfers, communication logs. All of it is pretty suspicious. Multiple payments from a shell corporation registered in Delaware into the HOA's operating account. The amounts match up with when the rezoning approvals came through." My stomach twisted. "So they're funneling bribes?" Hank shrugged. "It sure looks that way. If we can trace these funds back to specific county officials, or if we find a direct link to Ms. Lawrence's personal accounts, We'll have leverage to blow this wide open. But we need more concrete evidence before we can accuse them publicly. Michelle tapped a pen against the folder. We'll build a solid case. In the meantime, we need that injunction to stop the construction. If we can freeze everything while we gather more proof, we'll have a fighting chance in court. I swallowed hard. Time was not on our side. Every day, more of my land was being carved up, the foundations of those townhomes taking shape. Already, one or two of the buildings had begun to rise from the ground, like a bitter testament to how quickly greed could manifest in steel and concrete. Leaving Michelle's office that afternoon, I decided to drive by the construction site. As I parked my truck and stepped out, I saw a cluster of new residents, early buyers, standing with a real estate agent. They pointed at the half-finished buildings, imagining their future homes. My stomach churned. Did they have any idea they were purchasing property built on questionable deeds? Curiosity tugged at me. I approached cautiously, trying not to let my anger show. The real estate agent recognized me. Her cheerful expression faltered for a split second before she pasted on a bright smile. "Mr. Peterson, what brings you here?" she asked, her voice oozing artificial warmth. "Just checking on the progress," I replied, forcing civility. "I see you've got potential homeowners already. Hope you'd disclose the pending legal dispute about the land title." Her smile flickered, and a nervous laugh escaped her lips. We're following all legal requirements. The HOA assured us it's been handled." The prospective buyers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young couple, looked especially concerned. The woman frowned. "Is there a problem with the property?" I took a step forward. "It's complicated. You might want to look into the facts before signing anything." The agent ushered them away quickly, shooting me a sharp glare. But the seed of doubt was planted. With any luck, it would grow, keeping more unsuspecting buyers from investing in this fiasco. Still, the realization sank in. The HOA was moving full steam ahead, and they were confident enough in their scheme to start selling units. We had to act fast or risk losing everything. The next afternoon, Michelle called with what she said could be a game changer. I rushed to her office, Lisa by my side. Michelle was practically beaming. The injunction was granted. For now, construction must stop until the court reviews the evidence. It's temporary, but it buys us time. Relief washed over me, and Lisa squeezed my arm. Finally, some good news. "When does it take effect?" I asked. "It's already in effect. I've got a copy of the official order right here." Michelle handed me a stamped document. We decided not to waste a second. All three of us hopped into our cars and drove straight to the construction site. There we found Ms. Lawrence barking orders at a group of workers, apparently unfazed by the possibility that her project might be illegal. My blood boiled as I approached her. "We have a court order," I said, holding the document out. "You have to stop construction immediately." She snatched the paper from my hand, scanning it, her face turning an unflattering shade of red. "This is just a delay tactic," she snapped. "You're only stalling the inevitable." Michelle stepped up, her tone icy calm. "A judge disagrees. If you ignore this injunction, you're in contempt of court. That won't end well for you or your HOA." A tense standoff ensued, workers looking back and forth between us. Finally, Miss Lawrence pursed her lips and ordered everyone to stand down, at least for the time being. The hum of machinery sputtered into silence, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Yet, beneath that momentary victory, a nagging worry lingered. This was only temporary. The court battle loomed large, and we needed hard evidence of foul play. A forged signature might not be enough. OJS often had teams of lawyers adept at twisting facts. If we couldn't link Ms. Lawrence or her associates to corruption, the injunction would eventually be lifted, and my land would be lost. Later that evening, Lisa invited me over to her place for dinner. We needed to decompress. She cooked up a pot of chili and we sat in her cozy living room, the TV muted in the background. Steam rose from our bowls, the aroma comforting. "You think we can win this?" she asked, stirring her chili thoughtfully. I let out a long breath. "We have to. My family's legacy depends on it. But with every new piece of information, it feels like we're peeling back a layer of something bigger. I'm scared of what we might find at the core." Lisa looked at me, her eyes warm. No matter what's there, you're not alone. We have Michelle, we have the community, we have each other. That simple statement brought a lump to my throat. Sometimes, in the storm of legal battles and construction chaos, it was easy to forget the human connections that truly mattered. And if Ms. Lawrence thought she could trample on that without consequence, she was in for a surprise. Over the next few days, Hank, the private investigator, dug deeper. He unearthed emails between Ms. Lawrence and a mysterious developer called Coastal Sunrise Holdings. The name was deliberately vague, but the documents hinted at a web of corporate entities funneling money into the HOA's accounts. Michelle believed that if we could prove a financial incentive to push the rezoning illegally, we'd have our smoking gun. However, the more Hank investigated, the more we realized just how many layers of secrecy surrounded this. Offshore accounts, front companies. Someone was going to a lot of trouble to hide their tracks. Then one evening Hank called me, his voice tense. "You need to keep an eye on your farm at night," he warned. "I've been tailed twice this week. These people mean business, and they're not afraid to intimidate." Alarm shot through me. My farm was out in the open. If someone wanted to sabotage my property or scare me off, they had plenty of opportunities. That night, I double-checked every door and window. I even considered sleeping in the barn to keep watch. The thought of my mother in the house, vulnerable, gave me chills. The intimidation escalated quickly. 2 days later, I woke to find that my fence had been cut in multiple places, letting some of my livestock roam dangerously close to the main road. With Lisa and a few neighbors, I spent the entire morning rounding them up. It was exhausting, but also infuriating. The message was clear: back off or face the consequences. Determined not to let fear paralyze us, Lisa and I refocused on what needed to be done. We coordinated with local media, feeding them updates on the injunction and the allegations of forgery and bribery. People across the county began to pay attention, expressing outrage on social media. Even the local newspaper ran an editorial questioning the county's rezoning process. Meanwhile, Michelle updated me on the legal front. "The next hearing is set for early next month," she said, "and we'll need to present everything we have. The judge will decide whether to extend the injunction, possibly leading to a permanent halt to the development if corruption can be proven." Every day felt like a ticking clock, but also a small step forward. The hearing date loomed like a final showdown. I spent countless hours in the kitchen with my mother, going through old documents, searching for anything about the farm's history that might help. That was when we stumbled upon something neither of us had thought about in years: the water rights. The farm had been in my family for over a century, and at some point my great-grandfather had negotiated rights to the underground aquifer running beneath a huge swath of the county. I'd heard stories about that as a kid, but never really paid attention. Now, flipping through a battered old file, I found an official record granting my ancestors exclusive usage rights to the aquifer for agricultural purposes, and it was still valid. I froze. This wasn't just about farmland. It was about controlling the water supply for miles around, and if that was the case, I had a trump card I didn't even know I had. Word spread fast once I started asking questions about the aquifer. I spoke to an environmental engineer who confirmed that the water table beneath my family's land extended to nearly half the county. The original agreement, crafted in the 1920 cess, stipulated that no other entities could divert water from that aquifer for commercial or residential use without explicit permission from my family or its heirs. This revelation left me stunned. Suddenly, everything clicked. Was this the real reason Coastal Sunrise Holdings and the HOA were so determined to grab my land? Once they controlled the farmland, they'd get the water rights too, opening the door for massive developments everywhere. Water was gold in this part of the country, especially for future growth. I wasted no time in sharing this information with Michelle. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "This changes the game completely," she said. "If your family truly holds those rights, then any development that relies on that aquifer would require your explicit sign-off. And if they built without that, they'd be in violation of multiple environmental and water management regulations. Lisa, who was in the office with us, let out a low whistle. "That's huge! They can't just move forward if Jim refuses to grant them water usage. Even if they built the homes, the county might not allow them to tap into municipal water if it's supplied by the aquifer." My mind raced. If the HOA discovered I knew about these water rights, they might panic or escalate their intimidation tactics. But this was too valuable an ace to keep hidden. We decided to present it in court during the injunction hearing. Not only was the farmland rezoning suspect, but the entire project hinged on illegally obtained water access. Over the next week, we scrambled to gather additional records confirming the validity of the water rights. I tracked down old property maps, well permits, and historical county documents. Michelle's paralegal, a whiz with archives, found county commission notes from the 1950s exclusive claim. The stack of evidence grew until we had a formidable arsenal. But with each day of progress came more threats. Late one evening, a rock crashed through my living room window, wrapped in a note that read, "Drop the case or pay the price." My mother nearly fainted from shock. The sheriff came out, took pictures and made a report, but I doubted any real investigation would follow. The local authorities seemed either scared or complacent when it came to tangling with powerful developers. Despite the fear gnawing at me, I pressed on. This wasn't just for me anymore, it was for my entire county. If a shady HOA or developer could steamroll over long-standing water rights, what hope did smaller farmers have in the future? As the day of the hearing approached, my nerves were on edge, but I also felt an underlying sense of purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had something that made me confident we could win. Hearing day arrived like a storm rolling in at dawn. I woke up before the sun, restless and anxious. After a hurried breakfast, Lisa picked me up and we drove to the county courthouse. Michelle was already there, juggling thick binders of documents. The corridors buzzed with tension as Ms. Lawrence and her entourage appeared, their expressions grim. The hearing was held in a high-ceilinged courtroom with polished wooden benches. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Coleman, wasted no time getting to the point. She asked for opening statement. Michelle spoke calmly but passionately about the alleged forgery, the suspicious rezoning, and the bribery evidence. She then dropped the bombshell about the water rights. A ripple of surprise swept through the courtroom. When it was Ms. Lawrence's turn, she tried to dismiss the forgery claim as a misunderstanding. She attacked my character, implying I was trying to extort money from the HOA by leveraging some outdated water rights. Her attorney argued that any water agreement from the 1920s was archaic and might not stand under modern law. But Michelle was prepared. She presented case precedents showing that in our state, older water rights agreements could absolutely remain valid. She laid out the documents we'd collected, pointing to official county records that recognized my family's claim. Judge Coleman eyed Ms. Lawrence's attorney. "Do you have any evidence that these documents are invalid?" He cleared his throat, glanced at Ms. Lawrence, then fumbled through his papers. "We believe the usage rights were forfeited when Mr. Peterson's grandfather stopped farming certain sections of land in the 1970s. But the judge flipped through the documents Michelle had provided and found no such forfeiture noted. The attorney's argument fell flat. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. My heart pounded and my palms were sweaty, but I tried to maintain a composed expression. Every so often I'd glance at Miss Lawrence, who stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. She seemed rattled. After a brief recess, the judge returned with a preliminary decision. The injunction would remain in place, halting construction until a full investigation could be completed. Additionally, the water rights issue would be taken under advisement, meaning the court recognized the potential validity of our claim. If proven, it could nullify the entire development project. I felt a wave of relief so powerful I nearly sank to my knees. Lisa grinned, grabbing my hand for a quick squeeze. Meanwhile, Ms. Lawrence stormed out of the courtroom, her face burning red. I caught a fragment of her angry tirade as she snapped at her lawyer. "This isn't over." On the courthouse steps, reporters descended on me, shoving microphones in my face. I managed to stammer out a few words about fairness, heritage, and the importance of standing up against corruption. Inside, I was buzzing with adrenaline. We'd won a significant battle, but the war was not finished. Still, for the first time, I felt the scales tipping in our favor, and as I stood there under the bright midday sun, I silently thanked my ancestors for securing those water rights so many years ago. Unbeknownst to them, they'd just saved our county from a modern-day land grab. The fallout from the hearing was immediate and dramatic. Local news ran headlines like, HOA development stalls over alleged forgery and water rights dispute, and family century-old claim threatens major build. The public mood shifted even more strongly in my favor. People realized this wasn't just a matter of farmland. It touched on the region's resources and the integrity of local governance. Suddenly, public officials who had been silent earlier were eager to distance themselves from the rezoning. Even the county commissioner released a statement saying he never authorized any development that would violate existing water rights. Whether genuine or self-serving, the statement further isolated Ms. Lawrence and her cronies. Hank, our private investigator, capitalized on this momentum. He uncovered more emails suggesting that Ms. Lawrence had personally profited from steering the HOA into the Farmland project. There were references to kickbacks and special fees, though the language was vague enough to require further interpretation. Still, it painted a damning picture of greed and manipulation. Meanwhile, Coastal Sunrise Holdings seemed to be backing away. Their public relations team issued a bland press release stating they were reevaluating their investments in the county. Word was they didn't want to get entangled in a legal scandal. This left Ms. Lawrence even more isolated, facing the possibility of criminal charges if the bribery link was confirmed. One afternoon, as I was tending to a small patch of vegetables we'd salvaged from the construction zone, a sleek black SUV pulled up to my farmhouse. Out stepped a sharp-dressed man who introduced himself as Patrick Reese, an attorney representing the developer. He had a surprisingly friendly demeanor. "Mr. Peterson," he began, "I want to propose a settlement. Coastal Sunrise Holdings is prepared to pay a substantial sum for your water rights, strictly for the land area under dispute. You can keep your farm, your home, everything. We just need the legal right to supply water to the 50 homes already underway." My eyes narrowed. "So you want me to sell my family's heritage so you can continue building on illegally rezoned farmland?" He offered a polished smile. "The rezoning is still pending legal review. We're simply trying to resolve this amicably. Think about it. You'll be compensated, the HOA gets its development, and all parties can move on without a drawn-out court battle." The idea made my stomach churn. Sure, the money could probably set me up for life, but at what cost? I thought of my grandfather's calloused hands planting seeds, my grandmother's laughter echoing through the orchard, my father's pride every harvest season. The farm was more than land. It was the story of my family, woven into each furrow of earth. I took a moment, then gave him my answer. "No deal. We'll see you in court." Patrick sighed, shook his head, and got back into the SUV. As it sped off, I felt a twinge of fear. I'd just turned down what was probably a massive payout, but deep down I knew it was the right thing to do. Some things can't be bought, no matter how big the check. After rejecting the settlement, the pressure intensified. Ms. Lawrence tried to rally the partial HOA members who supported her. She circulated a letter within the existing HOA community, an entirely different neighborhood, miles from my farm, claiming that my refusal to settle would cost them thousands in legal fees and destroy their chance at a profitable expansion. She painted me as a stubborn farm owner who was clinging to obsolete claims. In response, some of her die-hard supporters began a smear campaign. On local social media boards, they spread rumors that I was hoarding water, that I was an environmental hazard for refusing to share, or that I planned to strip mine the land. The lies grew more ridiculous by the day, yet they stirred up anger among people who didn't know the full story. Fortunately, the majority of the community saw through the propaganda. Many neighbors posted in my defense, recounting how I donated surplus crops to local food banks or allowed high school students to visit the farm for educational field trips. They praised the farm's contribution to the county's heritage. Every personal testimony was like a shield against the false accusations. Meanwhile, Michelle and Hank finalized our case strategy. They consolidated evidence of the forged signature and the bribes, plus the water rights claim, into a single comprehensive lawsuit. The charges ranged from fraud to conspiracy to commit real estate malpractice. I felt a wave of anxiety each time I flipped through the hundreds of pages of legal documents. I'd never been part of something so massive. The next court date approached. A crucial session where the judge would decide if the evidence was strong enough to advance to a full trial and potentially hold Ms. Lawrence and others criminally liable. The stakes were sky high. If the judge ruled in our favor, it could mean shutting down the entire development for good. If we lost, the construction could resume almost immediately, and my farmland would be done for. On the morning of the hearing, I woke with a pounding heart. My mother said a quiet prayer before I left. Lisa picked me up bringing homemade muffins for good luck, although neither of us had much appetite. We drove in silence, both lost in our thoughts. In the courthouse parking lot, a small crowd of supporters cheered for us. I recognized fellow farmers and local residents who'd grown protective of my cause. Their presence lifted my spirits. Ms. Lawrence arrived surrounded by a cluster of legal aides, looking defiant despite the obvious tension on her face. As we filed into the courtroom, I remembered how this all began. Watching bulldozers tear into the land that was my birthright, my hands trembled with both anger and hope. For the sake of my ancestors and future generations, I prayed that justice would prevail today. Little did I know we were about to uncover one last bombshell that would change everything. The hearing got underway, Judge Coleman presiding once again. Michelle presented the bulk of our findings. Detailed evidence of bribery, accounts of the forgery, and the undeniable water rights documents. She argued that the rezoning was illegitimate from the start and that Ms. Lawrence and her associates had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to bypass regulations for huge financial gain. Ms. Lawrence's lawyer countered with the same tired arguments, calling the water rights archaic and dismissing the bribery as hearsay. But the tension in the courtroom was palpable, and Judge Coleman seemed increasingly skeptical of the HOA's defense. Then came a moment I'll never forget. Hank stepped up to testify. "Your Honor," he began, "I have new evidence that came to my attention just last night. A whistleblower from within the HOA provided a hard drive containing Ms. Lawrence's personal emails. On this drive, there is a digital trail confirming not only the forgery, but direct orders from Ms. Lawrence to county officials to expedite the rezoning paperwork with promises of financial kickbacks." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. My heart hammered so loudly that I could barely hear. Hank handed a thick folder of printed emails to the court clerk. Ms. Lawrence paled, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. Judge Coleman instructed the bailiff to distribute copies to the attorneys. As Michelle rapidly flipped through the pages, I could see her eyes widen with every new revelation. The evidence was explicit. Ms. Lawrence had orchestrated the entire fiasco, from forging my signature to paying off county clerks. There were even references to pressuring local law enforcement to ignore complaints. Before Ms. Lawrence's attorney could form a coherent rebuttal, the judge spoke. "I'm granting the motion to continue the injunction permanently. Construction on the farmland will remain halted. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's Office for Criminal Investigation." A hush fell over the room. Ms. Lawrence sank into her chair, visibly shaking. Her lawyer attempted some form of protest, but it was drowned out by the judge's gavel, striking down with finality. Court adjourned, and that was that. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. I managed a few words about justice and gratitude for the community's support. My voice trembled with emotion. I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of our victory. A few feet away, Ms. Lawrence tried to exit discreetly, but reporters ambushed her. She hid her face, refusing to comment. Within hours, news outlets blasted the story. HOA president exposed in massive corruption scandal. Farm owner vindicated in landmark water rights case. It felt surreal, like I was an actor in a courtroom drama instead of a farmer who just wanted to protect his land. Later that evening, I stood by the orchard, the warm glow of the setting sun painting the horizon in gold and pink. I inhaled the scent of fresh soil, letting relief wash over me. The bulldozers were silent. The farmland was safe, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. In the days that followed, the county formally voided the fraudulent rezoning. The construction equipment vanished from my property, leaving behind half-finished foundations that would soon be demolished. A wave of resignations hit the county clerk's office. People who'd been complicit in Miss Lawrence's scheme had no choice but to step down or face charges. An interim commissioner stepped forward with promises of stricter oversight to prevent anything like this from happening again. As for Ms. Lawrence, she was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. Coastal Sunrise Holdings quietly disappeared from the county's radar, presumably cutting their losses. Meanwhile, my farm's name became something of a legend in local circles, proof that standing up to corruption could make a real difference. I spent the following weeks restoring the damaged parts of my farmland. That meant refilling the trenches dug for water lines, removing debris from where the foundations had been laid, and rebuilding the fences that had been cut. It was hard work, but I had a team of volunteers, neighbors, friends, even folks I'd never met before, showing up with shovels and hammers. We laughed, sweated, and worked side by side, turning my battered land back into a thriving farm. On a warm Saturday afternoon, when most of the cleanup was done, I hosted a small celebration by the barn. We barbecued, played music, and shared stories of the ordeal we'd just overcome. Lisa was there, smiling from ear to ear, telling anyone who'd listen about the day we discovered the water rights file. My mother kept busy hugging everyone, tears of joy in her eyes. Before sunset, I stood up on a wooden crate to say a few words. "Thank you for believing in me," I began, my voice shaky with emotion. "This farm wouldn't be standing here without your help and determination. This has been a fight for honesty, heritage, and community. We showed that no matter how powerful the opposition might seem, they can't beat the truth if we stand together." Applause broke out, and I bowed my head in gratitude. Then I added, "And there's something I've learned. Real strength doesn't come from money or influence. It comes from the bonds we share, the loyalty, the kindness, and the willingness to do what's right." Silence hung in the air for a moment, and I sensed the weight of those words settling in. The farm was more than ever a testament to resilience and unity. As twilight deepened, I strolled to the edge of the fields, gazing at the horizon. The sun's last rays touched the rows of crops we'd replanted, painting them in a gentle golden glow. I thought about my great-grandfather, who'd secured our water rights so many years ago, never knowing how vital they'd be. I thought about my parents, who worked tirelessly to preserve the land's soul. I thought about the people who came to our side when everything seemed lost. In that moment, I understood a deeper truth. When a community unites to protect what truly matters, heritage, honesty, and each other, no force, no matter how wealthy or manipulative, can triumph for long. That's the timeless lesson we all walked away with, and it's one I'll carry in my heart for as long as I work this land.